Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Turkey because we've been following Turkey for the past few years and there is still a lot going on in the economy. Now, if we have a look at this chart, it shows what's been happening with interest rates over the past 5 years. And the reason why I'm starting on interest rates is because the central bank recently reduced the official rate of interest by 1.5% to the new level of 38%. And if you think about that in the context of your life, if you were paying 38% interest, or it would actually be more than that because that's the base rate, banks will then add a profit margin on top of that. If you were paying 40% interest rate on all of your debt, then that would put you under a lot of financial pressure. And if you have a look at what's been happening in Turkey with interest rates over the past 18 months, they were previously at 50% interest rate. That was the official rate of interest. We're not talking about loan sharks or anything like that. We're talking about the Bank of Turkey setting the official interest rate. So that is extremely high. And I think this really puts into context just how difficult the situation is in Turkey right now and how it's going to be so difficult to be able to fix it. And if we look at how that compares to the rest of the G20, the 20 largest economies, you can see that Turkey is right at the top of this list. The country with the next highest interest rate is Argentina, which is also in a world of pain at the moment in terms of its economy. Interest rates in Argentina are at 29%, and number 3 on this list is Russia with 16%. So all 3 of those economies are in a state of chaos right now. And if we have a look at how Turkey compares to the rest of the world, there is only one country with higher interest rates right now, and that's Venezuela. And I think Venezuela is probably one of the only economies that's in a worse state than Turkey because it's already facing lots of sanctions, and Donald Trump is now ramping up all of his efforts against Venezuela. The USA recently seized a number of Venezuelan tankers and has also formed a blockade, stopping all movement of oil in and out of the country. Number 3 on this list is Zimbabwe, where interest rates are 35%, and Zimbabwe's been in a state of economic collapse for many years. We've then got Argentina and Nigeria. And the reason I wanted to show you this was really just put into context how bad the situation is right now in Turkey. Now, one of the things I want to talk about in this video is inflation and the long-term damaging impact that inflation has on your economy, and particularly on the Turkish economy. Now, just before we go on any further today, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscriber button? I'm trying to grow my numbers. It really helps me with the algorithm. So you'd be doing me a real favor by hitting that button. It's not really a subscription. It's just showing that you like the channel. So thank you for doing that. And also, I wanted to mention that I'm currently running a competition whereby I am offering my house close to the beach in the southwest of England as a prize. So if you'd like to win my place, which is absolutely located in a brilliant spot in terms of one of the best beaches in the whole of the south of England, you can get some fish and chips down there, have a pint of beer, just have a stroll around. It's just a cool place to hang out. And the tickets are priced at only £5, and you can get one by scanning the QR code on the screen now with your phone or clicking the link in the description below. I've also pinned that. But if you're not interested in that and you'd still like to help the channel, because this is another way of me funding my lifestyle, because YouTube doesn't pay me that well, despite what you might have read in the press, then I'm also offering an alternative of £250,000 in cash in any currency that you like. So if you'd like to help me and help yourself and give yourself a chance to win, then please have a look in the link below or scan the QR code on the screen now. Thank you very much, and let's get back to the video. Now, if we have a look at what's been going on with inflation over the past 12 months, you can see a very nice trend here. We've got a continued reduction in inflation in Turkey. So at face value, that looks like really good news. And I think it is relatively good news. But one thing to note here is that the scale on the right-hand side does not start at 0. It actually starts at 30% and goes up to 55%. So a year ago, inflation in Turkey was sitting at 47%. Today, it's down to 31%, which, as I said, in relative terms is good. But in real terms, 31% inflation is still off the scale. And if we have a look at how that compares to the rest of the G20, only Argentina has a higher rate of inflation, and it's marginally higher. It's 31.4% compared with 31.07. So They're still both in the 30s. It's still a complete disaster. You can see that the next highest rate of inflation in the G20 is Russia at 6.6%. And if we have a look at how that compares to the rest of the world, you can see that Turkey is sitting at number 6. The countries above it are Venezuela, South Sudan, Iran, Haiti, and Argentina. So I don't think you really want to be in that group. And this really just tells us that all of these economies are having major problems right now. If we look at what's been going on with inflation over the past 5 years, you can see that it's been at elevated levels in Turkey for a long time. And I wanted to have a look at this worked example to give you a flavour as to what that means for prices for consumers in Turkey. So if we assume a product that is priced at $10. We'll keep it simple. We'll talk about dollars in this context. I'm going to come on to look at the exchange rate and the global impact in a moment, but let's just keep things simple right now. So a product that cost $10 in November 2020, if we look at what the price increase has been over the past 5 years, in 2021, inflation was 21%. So that $10 item would have cost $12.10 at the end of 21. In the following 12 months, inflation soared to 84%. So that $10 item would have cost $22.26 by the end of November 22. In 23, inflation was 62%. So that same item would then have cost $36.07. Inflation was 47% in 2024. So it would have gone up to $53.02. And the current rate of inflation is 31%. So that $10 item priced back in 2020 would today cost $69.46. So that basically means that a $10 item is now costing $70 in Turkey 5 years later. That is an increase of almost 600% over those 5 years. So that's an absolute nightmare as a consumer. And if we have a look at what's going on with food prices, because I always like to talk about this because it impacts on the poorest members of society the most because they're spending the majority of their income on food. This chart shows the movement in food prices over the past 12 months. And you can see that it's a similar trend to what we saw for general inflation. However, not quite as good. It isn't quite the same linear reduction that we saw for overall inflation. 12 months ago, food prices were increasing by 45%. Today, the increase is down to 27%. So again, in relative terms, that's quite good. But a 27% increase in food prices is not great because that means that you need your wages, your income to be going up by at least 27% to make sure that you can buy the same amount of food today as you could this time last year. Now, have a look at what's been happening over the past 5 years. The situation is actually worse for food inflation than it is for general inflation. So if we have a look at another worked example, if we take an item that was costing $10 in 2020, today that same item would cost you $81.50 because food inflation has been rising overall at a much faster rate than general inflation. So with food prices increasing by a factor of 8, that means that your salary would also need to have gone up 8 times over the past 5 years. And I don't think anybody has seen salary increases of that nature anywhere in the world. So this really puts into perspective the problems. Now, I said that we'd talk about what's happening with the lira, and this chart shows the exchange rate between the US dollar and the lira over the past 12 months. And you can see that we've got a straight line here. It's almost a 45-degree angle, which basically tells us that the lira is declining in value every single day. 12 months ago, $1 was trading for around 35 lira. Today, it's trading for almost 43. That represents a deterioration in value over the last 12 months of around 23%. And if we widen the scale of this chart to look at what's been happening over the past 5 years, you can see that 5 years ago, you could trade $1 for around about 6 lira. That represents a massive reduction in value. And if we have a look at that in terms of a table, you can see that over the past 5 years, the lira has lost around 82% of its value against the dollar. So that's obviously bad news when you're trying to buy things in the international markets. And as we've said many times before, Turkey is a net importer. It has to import fuel and food and lots of other items. So when the value of your currency is going down, that represents a problem. Now, if we have a look at what's going on with producer prices, because Turkey is a manufacturing country, that's basically what it does. It makes things. This chart shows the movement in producer prices over the past 12 months. We've got an interesting trend here because they were coming down at the start of 2025, but they're now going up again. And the latest data for November 25 shows that year on year, producer prices in Turkey increased by 27%. And if we have a look at what's been happening over the past 5 years, you can see that there have been significant increases in producer prices in every single month in the past 5 years. And if we have a look at what that means in terms of the overall increase in producer prices in Turkey, this table shows the year-on-year movements. And you can see that there's been some really big movements. In 2021, producer prices rose by just under 55%. In 22, they were up by 136%. 23, it was 42%. 29% in 24, and the current level is 27%. So what that means is that over the past 5 years, there has been an increase of 8.5 times in producer prices, almost 800%. That is absolutely massive. So you might be thinking, well, doesn't that mean that Turkey should be losing lots of business because their prices are going up so rapidly? Surely they're not cost competitive against the rest of the world. But obviously you need to take into account what's going on with the lira because producer prices are measured in Turkish lira. So I thought it was worth having a look at this table, which looks at the bigger picture. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the years, so 2020 through to 2025. We've then got the changes in producer prices, so the numbers that we've just looked at. And then we've factored in what's happening with the exchange rate. And then we're looking at the producer prices in Turkish lira, the percentage change, and then what's going on with dollars and what the percentage change there has been. So if we look at the 2020 line at the top, I'm assuming that we've got a product here that costs $10 in the international market. So back in 2020, that product would have cost 78 Turkish lira to produce. And then in the international markets, it's selling for $10. So if we look at the movements in producer prices, we've obviously got that massive increase that we just looked at. However, that's offset by the fall in the value of the lira, well, partially offset. So if we have a look at what's going on in US dollar terms for that same product, you can see that in 2021, that product would have actually fallen in price to $8.96 because of the devaluation of the lira in that year. In 22, it would have increased to $15.3. In 2023, it would have fallen to just over $14, again, because of the devaluation in the lira. So we had a huge increase in producer prices offset by basically the destruction of the value of the lira. In 24, it would have gone up to 15.17, which was still less than that product was selling for in 2022. And in 2025, that product, which originally cost $10 back in 2020, would now be selling for $15.75. So that represents an increase over the 5-year period of around 1.6 times. So significantly less than the movement in producer prices because of the reduction in the value of the lira. So you might be thinking, well, that sounds great. The lira going down in value offsets all of those producer price increases, so it doesn't really impact on Turkey in the long term. But unfortunately, when you've got a constantly deteriorating currency, it does have some massive implications for your economy. Firstly, it destroys household purchasing power. So the people in Turkey who are using Turkish lira are seeing the value of that lira going down all the time. They have to pay more and more for any goods that are being imported. And there's a lot of things being imported into Turkey. Secondly, it reduces people's confidence in the currency because one of the reasons why interest rates are so high is because the value of the lira is deteriorating. So if you left your money in the bank, you'd need to be paid a lot of interest just to keep the same purchasing power. So that's a problem in terms of giving people confidence. And what that leads to is a dollarization. People start using other currencies such as the US dollar, the euro, anything that they can get their hands on, which isn't deteriorating in value at the same rate. It also reduces the attractiveness of overseas investment. So, if you're an overseas investor and you're looking to invest in Turkey, what you don't want to do is convert your investment into Turkish lira and then watch its value starting to diminish. So, overseas investors basically pull back when you've got a situation like this where your currency is in the toilet, where it's constantly reducing in value. And that basically reduces confidence across the board globally in your country. And as dollarization starts to affect your economy, it basically then means that your central bank is unable to control what's happening with regards to moving interest rates. Because if nobody's actually borrowing money in Turkish lira or holding their cash in Turkish lira in the banks, then moving interest rates doesn't really have any impact on them. If they're all sitting with US dollars, then they're more aligned with what's happening with US interest rates than they are with Turkey's. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've got the latest data coming out about the Turkish economy. We've been following Turkey for the past 5 years or so, so I'm really interested to see how things are progressing. And one of the problems that Turkey faces, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's a net importer. It imports huge quantities of fuel and food and lots of other things, and it's been a close ally of Russia throughout the invasion of Ukraine. Turkey has managed to find itself in a very interesting situation whereby it's a member of NATO, but it's also been happily dealing with Russia. So it hasn't applied any of the sanctions against Russia, and in fact, it's become the third largest buyer of Russian fossil fuels. But unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, things are starting to change because Turkey is now pulling back from that arrangement. I recently reported that in November, the amount of fuel that Turkey bought from Russia had halved as a result of the sanctions that are now being applied against two of Russia's biggest oil companies, and also the fact that tankers are now being stopped. So it's becoming more difficult for Turkey to continue that relationship. And that's going to prove a problem for Turkey because it's going to push up the cost of its fuel imports, because the reason why it was buying from Russia is because Russia was offering it special deals. So that's going to be a challenge. But in today's video, we've looked at what's been going on with interest rates and inflation. And the reason why I wanted to focus in on those two items is because they are the barometer of what's happening in your economy. The reason why central banks are so obsessed with inflation is because once it starts rising and getting out of control, then it's very difficult to pull it back. And what we've seen over the past 5 years is that inflation has been rampant in Turkey. It's been in double digits throughout that whole period. In fact, it's been above 20%. And in fact, in some situations, it's been above 80%. So that's a problem in itself. But what we looked at in the worked examples in today's video is that when you have year on year on year on year increases in inflation like Turkey has seen, it basically destroys the purchasing power of your currency. So we've seen the price of products increasing by 7 or 8 times over the last 5 years, not 7 or 8%, 7 or 8 times, multiples of what it cost 5 years ago. So the flip side of that is that when you see movements like that in prices, it devalues your currency. And we've seen the Turkish lira constantly falling in value over the past 5 years. So that's bad news in terms of the purchasing power for Turkish residents. But what it means from Turkey's point of view is that they are now struggling to attract in overseas investment because it's very difficult to get a long-term return when you're seeing the local value of your investment going down every single day as the currency devalues. And that's a problem from Turkey's point of view because it needs to attract in lots of new investment because it's a manufacturing country. It's got lots of people. It wants to make things to try to grow itself out of the current situation. But unfortunately, as the lira goes down in value, that's becoming more challenging. And so the Turkish central bank is managing to reduce interest rates. It's bringing them back down to a better level than they were at, but they were at 50%, they're now at 38%, which sounds great if you want to put your money in the bank and earn 38% interest, but not if the value of your currency is going down by more than that. And that's what's happening in Turkey. So there are some major fundamental problems going on right now. In this video, I really wanted to highlight what the long-term impact of high inflation is on the economy. And I think we walked through those examples to show that even though producer prices have been going up rapidly, companies in Turkey are making less today than they were 5 years ago because the value of the lira is significantly lower. And that's going to be a really difficult situation for Turkey to turn around, because you need your companies to be making profits, to hire in more people, to pay more staff so that they can then spend in their local economy, produce the multiplier effect, all of that. But unfortunately, even though they're passing on higher prices, because the value of the lira is continuing to fall, it doesn't really mean that they're making more profit. And lots of companies in Turkey are struggling right now. And that's, again, another problem in terms of attracting in overseas investment. So the overall summary of today's video is, despite the fact that we're seeing reducing rates of inflation in Turkey, there are still some serious problems. The long-term inflation over the past 5 years has really damaged the economy. Inflation is still sitting at a very high level, as is interest rates, and the continued fall in the value of the lira is a major challenge for Turkey to be able to attract in overseas investment and see itself through this very difficult period. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm running a competition whereby you can win my beach house, which is valued at £350,000. It's a really nice place to hang out. Or if you don't want to do that, you can take £250,000 in cash. This is another way of supporting the channel. So thank you so much to everybody that's bought a ticket or is going to buy a ticket. If you go onto the link, then you'll see that there are some special deals on there. So have a look at those and get yourself some tickets. Thank you to everyone else who supported me. If you bought me a coffee, sent me YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a Patreon member or buy me a coffee member, really appreciate that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.